I'd like to welcome you today to the newest Bonner Institute webinar. As you know, our topic is AI and human capital management, what boards and C-suites need to know. I'm delighted that we have today Chantal Vavete, who is an independent board director with extensive experience in human capital management at the board and C-suite levels. And Chantal, I would not be able to do justice to your bio, so I would like to invite you to tell us a little bit about yourself today.
Well, first of all, John, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for your very kind words. So I'm a Fortune 10 C-suite executive, like you noted. I'm also an advisor and an independent board director with over 30 years in operational, functional, and leadership role in various industries from oil and gas, petrochemical, healthcare, and specialty pharmaceutical. I've provided strategic stewardship to complex transaction. Like you said, I bring expertise in human capital management and transformation to enable basically leadership to successfully execute their business strategy and deliver competitive results for their shareholders. I'm also a credentialed board director in the US and in Belgium, and I've served as a chair of the Comp Committee for a public company traded on New York Stock Exchange in the building material sector. But let's get started because we have a lot to cover, John.
Yes.
So here's high level, an overview of what we're going to cover. The strategic imperative, risk and opportunities, as well as we'll leave you with some guiding principle for you to think about. But there are some fundamental issues boards should really focus on as their enterprise navigates innovation, risk, and opportunities, as well as, which is sometimes overlooked, how human capital management factors into all of this. And this is an age of AI that is rapidly evolving, part of that digital transformation imperative. And I may even add, and many of you, I would think, would agree, that traditional AI and generative AI can automate and even replace certain percentage of human tasks. But, and the digital transformation is accelerating at a rapid pace. In fact, one of the latest McKinsey global survey on AI, I think it was sometime in May of this year, 65% of respondents stated the organization was actually regularly already using Gen AI. And that is nearly double the percentage from McKinsey previous survey, and that was 10 months ago. Also, which I thought was really interesting, read that by 2030, about 27% of current hours worked in Europe and 30% of hours worked in the US should be automated and could be automated. And all those changes are accelerated by Gen AI. And then some even have suggested that roughly 20% of hours work could be automated without Gen AI. So what does that all mean? Well, when AI is relevant to a task, a human job may be reconfigured as a result. And as AI progresses and accelerates, what I call from the plain vanilla AI to impact the entire teamwork, that also might be reconfigured. And as many humans interact with AI and become more adept, are using it, it will improve efficiency, it will increase productivity, but their work may also have to be deconfigured and deconstructed and reconfigured, maybe. That creates complexity. And most don't always think about taking the human-centric, the people-centric approach, as opposed to just the system-centric one. And understanding the ultimate impact on the individual, their responsibility, the routines, the behavior, and ultimately the enterprise overall culture. And all of which could actually lead, which is sometimes overlooked, to stress and burnout with all these many changes underway, which ultimately could hinder the transformation because it undermines workforce buy-in and even could create talent turnover. But on the other hand, let's be positive. AI-enabled transformation, if implemented obviously properly, can lead to what I call the game changer AI. And that could give enterprise a monumental competitive edge. John actually calls this step change evolution calibrating the human AI relationship. And in theory, when AI becomes extremely sophisticated and the human workforce is adept at kind of maximizing that productivity through optimal use of AI and continue to adapt because the acceleration of change is rapid, the enterprise is completely transformed, and with that, the workforce. But there's a big if. The big if is if it's managed well.
Mm-hmm.
And that type of enterprise-wide transformation will provide a definite competitive advantage, which actually could result in long-term value creation. But there are plenty of opportunities for hiccups. So let's kind of go to slide number 4, because I'd like to really frame the topic that we're going to talk about today. And there's 4 top-of-mind key points that I'd like to highlight. First and foremost, boards need to oversee and ensure that AI strategy is completely aligned with and supports their core business strategy. And in addition, the human capital strategy has to be integrated in this kind of overarching digital transformation. And when you think about it, boards really should ensure management is focused on the business need, has clearly defined success criteria. It doesn't matter if it's metric, KPI, prioritized tasks they'll focus on, but it has to be clearly defined for the entire enterprise. And I'll even add third parties, because those are all interconnected. And then boards also have to ensure that what is being implemented is really truly fit for purpose, and that change management and the digital transformation impact on the workforce is also taken into consideration and addressed as part of it, and not just as an afterthought. So that is number 1. Secondly, I would say that board needs to ensure that sustainability and resiliency of their enterprise is secure. And they remain at all times vigilant about not only the risk, there's a lot of focus on risk, but also opportunities. And in particular, board need to be diligent in not just overseeing the what, but also where in the organization, how, and even why they are using AI in their enterprise. And ultimately, boards needs to monitor the potential risk while maintaining a balanced perspective. And it's hard to do today in this current hype. We all know that innovation can lead to unintended consequences, kind of the unknown unknowns. And what I found is there really are no viable cookie cutter approach at all here. In addition, I think it's also important to underscore that there's a clear risk that is really focused on the external to the enterprise, such as not only just the bad actors, the technology disruption, the malfunction, but also there's a high dependency on major software giants, which have their own vulnerability and cyber risk from connectivity with vendors and suppliers. There's also a risk from the inside of the enterprise. Some having a clear understanding of what, they don't know what the mission critical assets and know-how might be and how to protect those. And that is key. And then besides risk, AI may offer opportunities, just as helping identify the mission critical and most valuable assets, which could be harmed from all this operational perspective. And on the other hand, always trying to look at both sides of the equation, AI can enhance cyber defenses against those increasing malicious actors across the board. Now, the National Association of Corporate Directors and ACD, and in conjunction with the American International Group, AIG, and the Internet Security Alliance, ISA, have published a report that it's really very interesting, and they've outlined a principle of all those corporate boards should be considering to enhance the oversight of cyber risk. And let me just read those to you. There's 5 points. Approaching number 1, AI as an enterprise-wide risk management issue, not just an IT issue. Understanding the legal implication. Have access to expertise and give regular and adequate time on the agenda, but also establish an enterprise-wide risk management framework with adequate staffing and budget. Board management also discussion should identify the risk to avoid, those to accept, and make sure they're aligned with their risk appetite. Also how to mitigate or even transfer to insurance with plans associated with each and every one of those approaches.
Mm-hmm.
Besides aligning AI strategy with business needs and remaining vigilant about risk and opportunity, there's a third point I'd like to highlight. To continue to frame our conversation here is to keep in mind that boards have to consider not only the impact on human capital, but also the required capabilities and expertise needed to execute and oversee that digital transformation. And I'll say last but not least, board should first and foremost ensure that the data is cleansed, modernized, and ready before embarking on any major digital transformation. That should absolutely be top of mind. Otherwise, we all know it will be garbage in, garbage out. So let's move on to some of those strategic imperatives. John, when we talked before, you even talked about, some boards and CFO are really focusing on AI as a cost-cutting strategy. And you even asked me, is that really the way we should view AI as an opportunity, maybe to eliminate FTE? And we had a conversation about that as we prepare for this meeting. And I think you're right. I mean, many relate job losses to AI. However, I think we should not forget that AI is dependent on human input and knowledge transfer, which is key. And those reduction in force due to increased efficiency, I personally think it's the wrong way to looking at the value of AI could generate. I mean, the human element is not only key to keep AI within proper guardrails, but there are not enough data scientists, not enough knowledge individuals to really meet the need and guide the enterprise on the AI side. And it may be wiser for companies or leaders to really think about upskilling and retraining the workforce they have. I also believe we still need to rely on high quality human generating data. I mean, considering that Gen AI is evolving rapidly and creating what they call synthetic data, the kind of data that's produced by AI and the output of the large language model, the LLM, that data may deteriorate, which could actually take a life of its own. And over time, it could lead to somewhat one calls model collapse. And that means that the enterprise will need human subject matter expertise to continue to train the enterprise large language model, but also play a role as a guardrail, making sure that those don't get off the guardrail, off the rail. So the way to think of AI, it's not as your potential replacement, John, but rather as a colleague or a coworker or a digital assistant, and be really kind of your helpful idea generation tool that may become a valuable partner in the future.
Yes, definitely. Chantal? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I know that you have been looking at the KPMG survey, and so I'll wait till you introduce it, but I do have some questions about when you mentioned the KPMG survey.
Yeah, and you also, we had talked about, the impact of the EU AI Act, and so some several states actually have passed some. Well, I believe that what you said before, and when we had those conversations, John, is that survey that we're going to refer to was released just 6 months ago.
Yes.
And even asked me is if you think that things are going to change, or even if you think boards and C-suite may pay more attention to the legal and regulatory environment around the use of AI and human capital management today, differently than they did maybe 10 months ago or 6 months ago when that McKinsey survey was released. And when you think about it, 6 months, John, that's a lifetime in this rapidly changing
AI world.
market.
2 weeks now. 2 weeks is a lifetime in the AI world today. Actually, it's shocking. Yes,
absolutely. And in some of the KPMG Board Leadership Center survey, there's one that had like 51 participants that were noted, and there were about over 100 company board members that had been surveyed. They stated that their organization had already reached a stage of proof of concept, piloting Gen AI selectively. And even 45%, if I remember correctly, the respondent had authorized the ad use of AI by their employees. So hopefully boards are well aware and not only are discussing this, how that's going to impact their organization, but are actually also overseeing the progress management is making. Now we can go to slide 6 and you can see some of the highlights of that survey. It was actually captured also by the editor-in-chief of Director and Board of Boards, Bill Hayes, who captured the essence of that KPMG survey results. And you can see he basically highlighted was what came out of that survey, talked about the top benefits, some of the most significant disruptions, some of the leaders' concern, and they're major if you look at those percentage, and also the risk of generative AI that most concern those respondents. But I know that last time we talked a little bit about, John, you also had some question about KPMG identify many risks that board are considering.
Yes, indeed. I read the survey, and one of the things that caught my attention is the fact that the concerns about regulatory compliance were quite low. And yet, and certainly in the United States, we're starting to see legislation, but the biggest activity is through the Biden administration's executive order. By contrast, the European Union and EU member states, the UK, China, Singapore, are quite proactive in regulating AI. And California has just passed a law regulating Gen AI. I think that occurred yesterday. And so I would think that the next version of the KPMG survey will show that boards have heightened concern about legal and regulatory issues. And some of the regulations are focused specifically on the use of AI in human capital management.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And also as they start talking about, what are the biggest impact that comes to mind that you should focus on as a board member and as a C-suite? And the list is long, John. Yes. I mean, if you look at the list, I think we've came up some of the question on slide 7 is kind of looking at the risk perspective. I mean, there's clearly a golden thread if you look at that list that may be overlooked by some, which is the human element again, throughout all impacted entities and the digital transformation, and may well be transformed as a result of the rise of AI, which means a continuous transformation of the human capital, a recalibration of the human and AI relationship. And if you really think about it, think about industries having to adapt. Think about enterprise having to reassess their competitiveness or the products and services they're offering to the market. Think about the core strategy having to be realigned, or the enterprise risk management have to be strengthened. All of that in response to new and increasing risk, including those internal and external stakeholders that, they have changing expectation as well. In addition, I will say all those impacted will need to learn how to navigate this fragmented regulatory environment. And it's an environment, some of them you already noted, which continue to evolve as AI changes are accelerating. And let's not forget that board's own role, their composition, their structure, which I may even touch on later, as well as the kind of information board will require and topics to be covered in the boardroom, as well as their meeting cadence, all of those going to have to adapt in this role of change.
Well, Chantal, a member of the advisory board of the Bonner Institute, Eric Vest, wrote a post about the use of AI to fulfill board functions, and that many board functions could be automated. And I'm curious, do you ever envision boards allowing AI to play a significant role in formulating the corporate strategy of the enterprise with or without a human in the loop?
Well, certainly there could be a woman in the loop, a man in the loop, there could be a human in the loop. And I think we can also talk a little bit about the impact, how it can enhance the decision. But let's dive a little bit broader, just kind of looking at it maybe initially before we get to that point, John, about the broader vantage point and briefly touch on what it could mean for industry and enterprise competitive position. I'll get back to the point. There's a lot of hype about the impact of AI on cost reduction, efficiency increase, and even growth opportunities or business model shifts. And no doubt, board are thinking about all of that. And AI is going to be able to help. And I'll tell you how. First of all, they're thinking about what I call the plain vanilla utilization of AI, focusing on efficiency and productivity. There's others that already focus on the more advanced AI, which is forcing boards to assess the impact on their enterprise business strategy, the market segment and trends, as well as their products and services, which can come out of some of them of the left field by competitors that were even unknown to the industry. Some of them are thinking about customer interface and expectation, leadership, talent, and even the social impact of AI, as we all know that it's going to have to be overseen by the boards. Clearly, there's a lot of focus on risk and perhaps even the recognition of AI's own limitation. However, with every risk comes opportunities. And boards should reflect on their own view of AI, because AI can provide input on the business, to your question, or to drive not only the digital transformation, but perhaps even reevaluate the business model, like entering a new market segment, build barriers to entry, or even fend off a competitive threat. And that big data can certainly contribute to identify growth opportunities and new segment that the board should focus on. But with every change and every effort, there is a price tag. And it will impact how companies integrate their use of technology and data, but also might require a unique expertise and a certain level of workforce transformation and board transformation. Because here again, the human capital is front and center. And that doesn't even take into account the labor shortage of these required skills.
Yes.
And so let's talk a little bit about the labor shortage and some expertise that is requiring as we deal with this massive amount of data. And then also kind of to your point is, should we have the board aligned to play a significant role in formulating the corporate strategy and the enterprise without a human in the loop? I think it's an interesting thing to think about, especially in light of the last 3 years, according to that Harvard Law School Forum. They had an article, I think it was published in March of this year, about the new governance paradigm is necessary for AI-powered boards, to your question. And what was interesting, there was a quote actually that I kind of prepared that talks about this in that article. And I quote, they said, the interest of AI role to support corporate strategy development and implementation has grown to the point that 36% of S&P 500 companies mentioned AI in their earnings calls last quarter, just recently. And however, only 13% of these companies have AI expertise on the board. And even some of them are primary IT firms. So AI expertise is held maybe by one board member, and the board itself does not always have an AI representative. So to your question is, it should make all of us kind of pause, right? And some of them may argue, and many will, and I think rightfully so, that we don't need always an expertise in every field on the board. But I think what boards should absolutely do, have enough technology knowledge to engage in really rich discussion and conversation about AI and in any kind of potential innovative solution. And also, I think another important point, John, is really the ability to ask the right question about the pros and cons, the viability of some of those options, and as well as really understanding the respective risk and opportunities which could arise from all these potential technology. And I know it kind of digressed a little bit there, but from the question about the board allowing AI to play a significant role in formulating the corporate strategy, I'm not sure, John. I mean, if boards will ever really solely rely on AI to craft their core strategy or having AI drive the decision-making process, considering the potential for bias, hallucination, model drifting, I don't know. But who knows? I mean, really, we don't know what the future holds. I mean, certainly AI use data automation and augmentation of our decision making, and all that could have a positive impact on especially on those data intensive and knowledge driven industry. But at the same time, avoiding model drifting by inserting a human factor to overseeing the work versus doing the work, I would think that would be important. And we've all heard about some of the stories when if there was not a human, they didn't always know the red flags and stop it. So that's something else. So to your question, I would say we still need human, John. And many envision maybe more like a cooperative sort of symbiotic kind of approach between human and machine. I can think of two examples. Many people say we're not going to need any radiologists anymore. AI can basically read all these results. But if you think about it, what we found is when AI is enhancing the results, there's an increased need for radiologists. There's another industry that comes to mind. Engineering and construction. AI could be a way to redesign the workforce with less boots on the ground in those difficult working conditions, and maybe allow for more offsite oversight, which could lead to perhaps more flexibility in working arrangements or in a way to attract a totally new talent that really is in tune with the technology. I even have heard board directors and colleagues, they're leveraging AI to frame an opportunity. Some of them are getting insight about a particular topic. I mean, at the same time, they're using cross-referencing to ensure the output is valid. I have some board members that are leveraging AI to complement their decision, or at least exploring potential opportunities and have a totally different view, again, without substituting human board member expertise. But it could certainly be interesting for boards and management to redefine their competitive position by using AI, kind of look at the industry boundaries. I mean, some of them are already looking at it to kind of anticipate customer expectation and respond to some of the changes. So it certainly will be, this is an interesting time. There's no doubt about that. And I can even see AI could definitely serve as a tool to support management to address specific risk, and even given them the ability to perhaps disrupt some of the and have a competitive in the competitive landscape. But one thing I would say for sure is that board should engage absolutely in the technology innovation discussion as part of that strategic planning process and integrate all those thoughts into the overall core strategy. But there's another thought that comes to mind, and that's not always the case, but what I've seen is a challenge is sometimes our technologists, our CISOs, our CIOs, our CTOs have an incredible ability to really understand the technology, but it's so important also for them to be able to articulate innovation, opportunities, and their related risk in kind of a business and financial terms, so that there's better conversation and more in-depth discussion in the boardroom versus just focusing on kind of the tech part of the system and the risk related to them.
I notice you have noted the impact on board structure and board composition. I'm curious, do you think that board committees need to change? Which board committee should have primary responsibility for AI, or is AI, should it be for the entire board to consider and parts of AI delegated to a specific committee? Should there be an AI committee? I'm curious what your thoughts are, basically, because you have extensive board experience.
Well, there's a lot of discussion about that.
Yes,
I mean, just for our audience, I would think just to frame it, For those that might not always be totally familiar with the fiduciary duties of a board, let's just kind of frame that by saying they have to act in the best interest of the enterprise and its stakeholders. Many of you are very familiar with the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, the duty of good faith and obedience. But basically, for those that are not familiar with fiduciary duties, let's just put simply, its boards have to make decisions in a prudent manner and with reasonable care.
Yes.
And it goes without saying, to your question, John, you've heard that the audit committee is often the primary committee that's been responsible for cyber and technology. But there's so many new regulatory changes and so many other things they're focusing on. They could be easily overwhelmed with many of those new responsibilities that have been given to them in the recent years. So some believe board structure, to your point, may also have to be transformed in this digital transformation. The question we may ask ourselves is it a risk committee that you want to maybe add, or a technology or an advisory committee? And maybe even more appropriate to oversee that digital transformation. Some boards have used third party to assess the maturity level of their system or even provide some insight. Though one thought that comes to mind is having separate committees that might tend to silo the focus. Because each committee have their own focus in their different unique areas of expertise. So I've seen a number of boards, and many of them, what they do instead of incorporating AI oversight into an existing or a new committee is actually more related and have those related to risk and opportunity. They actually have each committee identify the risk that they're refocusing on and then report back to the full board. And in fact, that's really where the oversight role should ultimately be, to look at it holistically. But again, there's not a right or wrong answer here. It all depends of so many factors. I mean, it could be the industry, the company size, the level of readiness of the workforce, their digital transformation. There's so many different factors that come into play. So I think it's something for each board to really reflect on and decide where it should be focused, where it should be the primary responsibility. But ultimately, I believe the full board has to have complete oversight.
Chantal, in your experience, how many or what percentage of boards do you think are apprised of the situation of the need to review their oversight and to adapt to the new realities of AI?
Well, that's a very good question, James. I think there's definitely discussion at the board that I know of. And we talk about in all the professional organization that I'm a member of. Because, clearly is the material that all of us have to prepare and review. And that is just for the board meeting, but also everything that we do in between the board meetings, the conversation, we all self-educate, we all do so much preparation. But certainly as you also have a limited amount of time that you meet together. And so there is sometimes some advisory committee that I created to handle that. But certainly reassessing and reviewing. I mean, there's certainly a lot of discussion at the audit committee level because they have so much already on their agenda. And there's so much other focus that are all so critical. I think it's an ongoing conversation, but those that are not even reviewing or discussing it, I think I would encourage them to do so, because the AI, the cybersecurity, the rapid change is going to require some reassessment of where that responsibility lies. Do they have the right resources? Do they have the right expertise to guide them?
Yes.
I mean, I would say there's a lot of conversation around that, James.
Yeah, thank you. That's good.
Thank you. That's a good question.
I'm curious.
Go ahead, John. John, you and I have many conversations we've had, and you had quite a bit interesting conversations. So I know you probably just have another one for me.
I always do, because it's always fascinating. We could talk all day. I'm just curious, should there be a committee, since the calibration of the human AI relationship is so critical, and it will be a continuous calibration? Should there be a committee focused on AI and human capital management? Or should, I do know that some, very few, but some boards have a human capital management committee. And what should be the interaction between such a committee and the chief human resources officer? And who owns the daily calibration? Is that still in the C-suite? How deep should the board go into the calibration of the human AI relationship?
Well, I can say, I mean, that's a very interesting question, John. But I'll tell you from experience what I've seen even through the years I've served, not only as an executive leadership member of the team in sitting in boardrooms, but also as a publicly traded company independent board director. I see even transformation in the compensation committee. You all have heard that compensation committee have renamed themselves. There's even more focus on leadership. They renamed their charters, and the focus is much deeper in the organization today than it was maybe 10 or 15 years ago. But I'm not sure if there will be an additional committee that might be focused solely on AI and human capital management. I mean, if you think about it from a logistic perspective, that may be a little difficult because there's not many days that they are together. And so logistically that might be somewhat difficult, but perhaps an advisory committee that has some oversight. What I've noticed in all the reading that I've done, I found it sometimes interesting. All the C-suite are mentioned about their role, but one particular article that comes to mind never mentioned the CHRO role. And I think that's something that board should really start focusing on a little bit more. And the key is to really making sure that human capital management perspective is not overlooked. And it's also about just collaboration. For instance, one of my previous employers, what they did is really having different organizations embedded in ours. In my case, I had actually an IT point person that was embedded in my team, who was part of the technology IT organization, but was really integrated into mine. And IT played an integral role assessing all the third-party software solution we were considering in my function to validate, making sure that was in line with our cyber risk management program, to also help and oversaw the implementation. And it was very clear to all the function, it didn't matter which one you were working in, all had to make sure that IT was going to validate and sign off on any new software before it was even introduced in our company. And I think that collaborative effort, I think, is going to be very, very important. But bottom line, regardless of what committee is responsible, to your question, to oversee AI and make sure that human capital is part of it, I think the full board needs to closely exercise their oversight, not only over that technology strategy, but also the human capital. And even beyond the human capital, they really have to ensure they look at the efficacy of the AI governance framework. So the enterprise risk management, when we looked at it on my previous employer, there was a whole part of the ERM that focused on the human capital. And today I even talk about the PRM. So some of you might not have heard of the PRM. I've kind of created that term. I call besides the enterprise risk management, I think we need also focus on the product risk management. Because if you think about it, it's not just focusing on the enterprise as a whole, but also we should focus on the individual products that we introduce in our company ecosystem. As a matter of fact, CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, has recently introduced their new, what they call Secure by Design and Secure by Demand initiative. And they're really emphasizing that the burden doesn't just fall on the end users, but also on the software developers and the producers, where many of them introduce vulnerabilities initially, and that's what's being exploited by bad actors. So already what I found, I just happened to be on a webinar where the director of CISA was presenting, and there were 200 companies that already had signed the CISA Secure by Design and Secure by Demand principle pledge. And hopefully boards can also take in the time or ask their management to really become familiar to make sure that the enterprise follow CISA guide when before they introduce some new software solution, but also maybe also to look at the current one that are already in place. And by the way, for those of you that are interested, we've put that website on the slide. One of the last slides actually give you access to that website. There's another one actually that comes to mind is companies should also leverage NIST. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which published also a very interesting guide, the AI Risk Management Network Guide. That's also a really great reference to use, and everyone should be really familiar with that. Now, one last important point to make here is boards should absolutely assess where to best deploy capital. Not only to accelerate the digital transformation, but also ensure that the enterprise risk management or product risk management function have the necessary resources. And that includes staff to reduce the risk exposure, to make sure that they have minimized any potential financial penalties, the legal actions, reputational damage, and all the other liabilities that I think everybody pretty much is aware of.
Very interesting. I'm just curious. I know that you have focused a lot on the talent shortage, and I'm just curious, how do boards, if AI is constantly evolving and you're constantly upskilling, how does the board find out when you need to hire new talent versus upskilling the existing talent?
Well, like we talked about, if organizations that just, reduce their workforce because they think they have increased productivity and efficiency. By the way, just improving efficiency doesn't mean that employees are going to use that time for higher level type of value to the organization. But I think some of the things that clearly the human part is still very important. And as far as labor shortage, I think really a focus on upskilling, John, and reskilling is going to be important. There's not enough skill set outside in the marketplace. So companies are going to have to really focus on that and understanding the evolving technology and including, how to really prepare their employees for this development. I mean, the other thing I think we need to keep in mind is the board. Think about, your question about should we replace human board members? One thing that I didn't mention is U.S. does not allow board responsibility being discharged by anyone but a natural person. Now, that's not the case in other countries. But clearly, I think upskilling is going to be critical. And with that, also, I think about it, boards have to really learn to develop a better knowledge. And boards may want to enhance their own understanding of evolving technology, including learning through hands-on demonstration and experience. I know that some organizations like NACD even organize opportunity for their membership to attend conferences that presented the latest technology. The other thing that's really an interesting point that I read recently on another survey from KPMG is that 73% of board directors self-educate about technology. Think about it, 73%. 50%, if I remember correctly, learn through management presentation, and about 36% through third party. Now, that's if I remember, but I think the number are pretty close to that. It might be worth reassessing as a board member how to educate themselves and nurture this kind of continuous learning culture throughout the enterprise, but it starts at the top. Another way for them to learn also is probably to participate in cyber threat tabletop exercise. And it doesn't have to be with management, it can be without management. But board really, if you think about it, at least they should consider providing continued education and to know not only what to look for, but most importantly, what question to ask. that is maybe one of the most important thing boards can do in light of the information. And the other thing that, to put another context to it, there was another article that was by also the Harvard Law School. They had a one titled that was released in February of this year. It was called Living in Interesting Time. And it referred to a recent survey from Audit Committee. And what they found is there was a minority of respondents, I think it was about 41%, that indicated their committee had sufficient cyber expertise. But at the same time, a majority of them, it was over 60%, they ranked it as a top priority. Now, that is something to reflect on if you think about it as an individual board director, as we should be future ready. If we expect our workforce to be digitally savvy and master new skill, so should we as board director. So to kind of, I know a little bit over the map here, but I think to wrap up my answer to your question, John, is it's really about AI replacing or complementing boards. To that question you raised is simply put, I would say AI has to provide the opportunity to augment the skills in the boardroom, but I don't think they will replace human board members. But who knows? Who knows? Now, another thought is, if you think about, you talked about new board, new committee. Maybe another thought is, should the board maybe increase the meeting frequency? I've seen some articles that talked about that. And what else should the board do? Well, absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, well, besides self-educating ourselves, having third-party teaching and keeping us informed, absolutely. I think considering the rapidly changing world of innovation we live in, boards should consider increasing the frequency of board meetings and perhaps even increasing their length. The pace at which this change is moving is you have to be agile, and that's really going to be key. Agility is key, and it's going to be important to address the need for greater oversight over all these complex challenges, and make sure that you really stay on top of it. However, more meetings doesn't necessarily mean effective meetings. I think that's not going to improve the oversight if the board is not well equipped, if the board is not asking the right question. You have to generate meaningful conversation. So more meetings might not be the answer, but certainly more meaningful conversation and rich conversation and discussion is going to be key. And I would say one point to emphasize, might be that sometimes it's overlooked, is the shift of the cadence of the annual talent strategy review. We've touched a little bit about the fact that compensation committee have renamed themselves. They have a higher focus on human capital management, not just compensation, leadership development. But if you think about considering the rapid change of the digital transformation and the impact on workforce transformation, it might be wise for the board not to have a once-a-year talent management review or succession planning review, but really have a shift in the annual talent review in the context of long-term corporate business and digital transformation strategy, and having really frequent update in order to oversee maybe the workforce transformation, but also evolving human capital skill set and their expertise, to make sure they have the talent, the expertise, the staffing required to not only execute the digital transformation, but also minimize the risk. And again, another article I read recently was about the time to think about talent in the boardroom that was released in March of this year by the Harvard Law School Forum on Corporate Governance. And they refer to a study. It was a study that was done by Deloitte about the global program, boardroom program about human capital trends. And it surveyed, I think, about over 500 board members and C-suite across 50 countries. So it was pretty a global approach. It showed how boards prioritize workforce-related topics. And the interesting thing is there were two major topics on that workforce-related topics that mentioned human capital. And I think I have prepared it. Yes. The two top board priorities they were listed and was number one, aligning workforce-related investment with strategic priorities and maximizing benefits by combining technology in the workforce. So clearly there is that talk in the boardroom and there's becoming a higher emphasis, but I'm not sure that every board is increasing the cadence of review on the workforce transformation. That might be something worth considering. And with that, I would say boards should ensure that enough capital is allocated and qualified resources are in place to, again, not just minimize the risk, but also optimizing the opportunities. And there should be an expectation for boards to receive those regular updates on the investment, specifically dedicated to mitigate those risks, making sure that you have a higher degree of resiliency, but also business continuity. And you definitely need human for that. So I would emphasize one last point on this, because I know I've covered quite a bit, is for board and management to agree on one more thing, because it's probably more important than ever, is the protocol as to what needs to be escalated to the board at what point. And that applies not only also on ransomware. Some companies might not have had the conversation, should they or should they not pay? Those conversations should take place before a real situation comes to life. So we've covered quite a bit. There's one we haven't covered yet, but I'll touch base because I'm looking at the time and we are, running out of time here. So I briefly emphasize a little bit. I'd like to talk also, if you don't mind, John, is also the impact on internal and external stakeholders. Mm-hmm. And again, that human capital strategy. We've covered a lot, some of it through the presentation, but I'd like to emphasize a few more points because I think we have a little bit of time, if that's okay. I'll say that workforce transformation has to be an integral part of this digital transformation. But also I would say that humans have to be an integral partner in any AI transformation. And so that goes to your question, keeping human in the loop. And it's really important when introducing AI solution in the workplace to get the buy-in of the workforce. If not, you're not going to have a successful implementation. And I would say it's even more fundamentally important to align the talent-related investment with those strategic priorities. And at the center of digital transformation are the talent and, but like you talked about, the labor shortage, the skill scarcity that goes with technology-related issue. And previous continuous learning will prevent leaving some of the workforce behind. We have to retrain, we have to upskill, we have to enhance the data literacy, we have to empower ourselves and others with AI-specific training and learning materials, even with a heavy dose of change management, which absolutely will be necessary to maximize the benefit of AI. The interesting point that comes to my mind also is the director of SciSci said that a lot of students that are getting MIS degrees, there's not an emphasis for them to have a course on security. And that's an interesting point too. Each of us need to be better equipped to understand the risk, but also how to mitigate the risk. So I think we're ready, John, to really start wrapping up and maybe move to slide number 8. Okay, so there is a lot of questions we kind of prepare here, and I think we're pretty much looking at them, touch based on most of this question. But there's one last point that I think is going to be important to make. It's about growing complexity of operating in today's fragmented regulatory landscape. And John, you already mentioned a little bit about the EU AI Act and some of the changes at the state level in the US. But that kind of fragmented regulatory landscape is amongst geopolitical uncertainty, increasing nation-state bad actors, and a lot of malicious attacks. So to just kind of wrap it up, so we don't take too much over the 1 hour time here, I think it's going to be important to find a balance between compliance regulatory requirement and their own policy setting standards. That's what we should focus on, as well as, again, foster that kind of robust cyber awareness culture, and for companies to have a well-established governance framework, and it's all aligned with the corporate values. So your compliance, your regulatory requirement, your policies, all of them should be all aligned. And make sure that we hold all parties accountable to use the technology responsibly and monitor those policies. And actually, those are going to have to be adjusted as we continue to change, but making sure that those policies are working and are governed ethically as they are intended. I mean, those are some important points. And you mentioned it, John, for those that don't know, there's not a lot of regulation in place yet. There's some exception, like the one you noted. EU has the AI Act, which actually has broad extra territorial reach and cover any entity using an AI system in the EU with, frankly, significant penalties for violation. There's not really today any really similar legislation in the US, except for a few specific state and maybe some local laws. But there's no really a robust regulatory environment yet that is quite in place. So really, we should rely on the companies to make sure they have their own policy setting standard and their own framework well-defined and in place. The only basis for future regulation in the US, and you've touched on it very briefly, John, is President Biden is non-binding executive order. That's the safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of AI. It has 8 principles to govern the use of AI. It's a good one to really go back and review. And it's important for boards and management to stay on top of all these evolving regulation and ensure compliance. And there's some that are actually contradictory. If you think about it, there's so many around the world and even within this country. So I know that we've unpacked a lot of things here. And we know that some of those software developers have created some heartache for many of us over the years.
The recent CrowdStrike outage that caused the global IT outage is a very good example of that. Reliance on a single AI vendor and a single cybersecurity vendor. And it is a very prestigious computer technology society. And I apologize, it just happened a few days ago. They said that it is absolutely inevitable that we will have similar outages in the future. And I think boards will also have to think about, if I'm going to adopt an AI first business, that's going to occur at least partially in the cloud, partially perhaps on premises. And if my business is dependent on 1 or 2 cloud providers, 1 or 2 AI providers, and all of my revenue is tied to that, what is my business continuity plan if there's an outage? And I think that's one of the most challenging things to deal with. And that becomes part of the human capital management question. You'll need to upskill your employees not only for AI working, but for AI not working. And that's a big risk. And I don't know how to address that, quite frankly.
Well, I think we all struggle with that, John. I mean, that's the challenge. I mean, even I think we've captured some of those on the next slide when we kind of capture, the new, we'll have to be mindful of the new SEC disclosure rule. We have to be mindful of the geopolitical threat. I mean, we're in the middle in the US in an election. In Europe, they had recently some of their election, and that can have a change. I mean, there's a rapid growth in AI and machine learning. I think we're all trying to figure it out. Technology says that Gen AI is going to create opportunity to enhance maybe the cyber defense, but also provide some malicious actor to take advantage of the vulnerabilities of those software providers you mentioned. There's cybercrime, and it's unfortunately, it's increasing in volume and speed. It's increasing around the globe. I found out from a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, that she was traveling to some countries recently, and they actually had courses on how to leverage and take advantage of those vulnerabilities. So that's quite concerning. And then boards have to obviously prepare to define the materiality around disclosure. That's another one. And certainly the last but not least, again, cybersecurity. So I'm just looking at the clock here. I want to be mindful. So to go to the question that you had paused maybe earlier on is, should board weigh their dependence on AI? I would say simply a few last thoughts. Those who ignore AI will be surpassed by those who are actually embracing it. So the question about human capital management requiring training in AI to focus on cybersecurity, there's one thing that I found that I think most boards are not going to focus on, but they should. Regrettably, I've just read this weekend that according to a report at Workday, actually it's online, you can access it. They had done a survey of global CHRO and kind of have an understanding where they stood on their AI efforts. And unfortunately, 42% of those HR leaders that responded to that survey said that their team members are not fully prepared for AI. And that is the highest percentage of unpreparedness of all functions surveyed by Workday. Now, if you think about it, considering that AI training will play a pivotal role, we've talked about it for the past hour, on AI readiness, and HR might be viewed as an enabler. That's worth inquiring about to make sure that everyone is properly equipped and the entire workforce and any function that is not properly equipped. That means two things. Either it means that AI data and opportunities are not going to be fully leveraged, and you're actually losing your competitive edge, or even more concerning, risk can be compounded by a lack of workforce readiness. And that by itself could spell disaster. So just to kind of wrap up here, moving on to slide 10, we've covered most of the risk. We'll leave the audience with a positive outlook, John, because I think we should be mindful of risk, but also we should explore possibility to leverage AI and capture all these opportunities related to human capital. So I think that would be important. So I believe there are benefits of AI are clear to many. There's the obvious, what I call the plain vanilla. It's going to improve efficiency. It's going to improve productivity. But also the AI can actually become a game changer. Now, some people opinion might varies, but I think that a lot has to do with how to leverage AI. And with everything else, a balanced and structured approach is the best approach. And AI will be reshaping how we work, how we learn. I know someone that just took an exam and he told me he used ChatGPT to get the essence of all the material he was studying. I never thought of that, but think about how clever. And with that, future workforce requires skills. And I believe that what you brought before is the human in the loop approach, centering the human at the heart of AI adoption is here to stay, at least in my lifetime. So integration, could be more and less depending on the industry. But I think definitely. So 2 more points, and I think then we'll move to the last slide because we're just a little bit over the hour. I would say all transformation can have a positive impact on workforce engagement and ultimately on talent retention and actually maybe even a talent attraction. There's always going to be concern about safeguarding data for privacy, as well as avoiding the bias that are ultimately built in algorithm, and they may actually question the data accuracy, but it all comes down to governing ethically and transparently. And for the board to really have the necessary ability to ask the right question and then have a good, deep, robust oversight. So
Mhm.
what we've done is on the next page, John, we've left some guiding principle for everyone to think about. It's kind of things to keep in mind as digital transformation never happens in a vacuum. I mean, board transformation, business transformation, workforce transformation, all of those are going to be an integral part of digital transformation. And if one of those are overlooked, I don't think it's going to have the kind of positive outcome and benefit that one can have out of AI. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, John. I hope this kind of gives enough insight for people to be reflecting and give it some thought. I can tell you that what I found is I can find a multitude of articles every day and any day,
Yes.
lots of resources. There's a lot of conversation. The best way to learn is really kind of read what others do, having conversation in the boardroom at the management level, but there's not enough hours in the day to keep
Yes.
up with all the changes. So be judicious with your time and focus on the right thing. But I'll turn it over because now we're 5 minutes over and I'm very sorry about that, but hopefully this was bringing some value to all of you.
Well, I did want to, I think you have a beautiful slide right here and I love this Venn diagram. And I do think it's important. I just wanted to note, you talked about the holistic approach is essential. And I believe that this slide, you could do your entire presentation from this beautiful slide. It's a beautiful graphic. I would recommend that you publish it and even copyright it as a graphic. I think it's really that nice. And I wanted the audience to see that. And the other, I wanted to make sure that the audience saw the CISA website. And one other point I would like to suggest, because I was just on a panel on AI in Cincinnati, Ohio, about AI in healthcare. And one of the points I made is that given the fact that we are in a fragmented legal and regulatory environment, following the principles of responsible and trustworthy AI is the best strategy. And I would like to note that the EU AI Act specifically refers to several principles of responsible AI. So it's literally putting it into law: trustworthiness, accountability, privacy, security, robustness, and resilience. And the Biden administration's executive order does the same. So that is one way, think about that in the context of AI and human capital management. Chantal, I just want to thank you very much for this wonderful webinar. We hope that you will come again and do another webinar and explore some of these topics in greater depth. They're very pressing. So thank you very, very much on behalf of the Bonner Institute.
Thank you for the opportunity, and it was very nice seeing you, John and James. So until next time.